Let's have a look at the 3 areas that you have to scale if you want to scale the business. So if you want to scale business, you have to scale sales and margin, operations, and last but not least, recruitment and training capabilities. On top of that, if you want to really scale the profit and not only the size of the company, obviously you have to control the costs and constantly look for opportunities to do cost reduction. Obviously without harming the business, but rather in order to generate the profit you are targeting. Now, let's go briefly through the options we've got in each and every area, and we will obviously discuss them later on in next sections in details. So when it comes to sales and margin, we have the following options. So the first thing you can do is simply to scale distribution. In other words, be present in bigger number of stores, reach more customers, create such a distribution system that almost all customers are within your reach. On top of that, you will have to most likely also scale products. So it means adding new products within existing categories or adding new categories as well. A lot of effort is also devoted to something which we call scaling customers. In other words, convincing him to buy more. So it's either convincing him to switch more of his purchases to you or simply increasing the demand for your products. And we're going to discuss this in more details later on. You will see how other companies are doing that. Quite often, you also have to scale the brands. And within this category, we have all the efforts around first making people aware of your brand, creating new brands if necessary, because maybe one brand is not capable of handling different customer groups, and in some cases also acquiring other strong brands. And finally, we've got scaling markets, so entering new markets that you can do the things we have listed here as well. Now, when it comes to operations, you have the following things. So first of all, you can obviously improve the efficiency of existing assets. Then you can add assets by buying them, renting them, or finding ways to actually use assets that don't belong to you. A huge drive in operation scaling is changing technology. Some changes enable you simply to scale faster or more your operations. In many cases, also, you have to add partners in order to scale operations. And by partners, we will mean suppliers, but also quite often distributors or other firms that you have to build around you in your ecosystem so you can grow in size. And finally, a lot of companies are able to scale by adding products that simply require less assets. And you will see a lot of examples of that as well. Now, when it comes to recruitment and training, we have the following options. So the first one is pretty obvious. You want to retain current employees so you don't have to recruit new ones and train them. Then you have to also work on training faster and more efficiently. In many cases, you may have a problem with potential candidates. So where you are located, the number of candidates will not be sufficient. Therefore, you have to increase the pool of candidates, for example, by creating new factories or new offices in other cities in other countries. Change in technology obviously also helps. So if you replace people with machines of software, then obviously you can scale recruitment and training with less people. And there are 2 last options which quite often are used by companies. So first of all, you reach the scale by buying other firms where you already have organized teams, or you simply outsource part of your work to other firms. And in this case, you have actually partners instead of employees. So you don't have to scale your people, but actually you have to scale operations. So that's in short when it comes to these 3 areas. Before we move further on, a few suggestions what actually should be done before you start scaling the business. So here we have mentioned the options which you have in each and every area once you decide to scale. However, scaling is in some cases not a good idea, and certain requirements should be met before you start scaling. So first of all, you should have a product market fit. By this, we mean that you have a product that people love or find it useful and they are willing to pay for that. And most of all, they would be unhappy if you remove that product. Another important thing is unit economics. So the business is profitable at least on the level of variable costs. So what you get from the customer is at least covering the variable costs. So you can reach the overall profitability if you increase in size. And this requirement quite often is not met by a lot of startups. For example, Uber or WeWork had huge problems with that, which meant that at some point they were not able to scale the business because they simply were burning a lot of money. Scaling also requires you to first standardize and implement best practices in the places where you're operating. If you don't do that, you end up scaling the problems and scaling a lack of consistency in the organization. So it's better to actually do that before you scale. Otherwise, you'll be scaling a not standardized company, but huge problems and lack of integrity. Obviously, you also have to have money for scaling. In a lot of cases, scaling requires a lot of capex. Therefore, you have to invest a lot of money ahead of time. Bear in mind that also in many cases, you have to invest many years before you actually see the capability. So for example, if you want to scale production, you have to invest the whole sum of money 2-3 years before you actually see the production facility operating. It is also wise to pick for scaling big enough problems. So if you have a business that is solving a small problem, then obviously at some point you will hit the ceiling. You will not be able to scale more because there will be simply not sufficient demand. And therefore you would have to be very creative in finding new problems because the original problem you choose to solve is simply not big enough. Therefore, if you want to scale, make sure that what you do is simply a big enough problem. So there is a sufficient amount of potential customers that you can try to reach when you scale the business. And finally, scaling requires long-term thinking. So if you are on the stock exchange and you are worried about the results you get every quarter, then actually scaling is the fastest way to get fired by the shareholders, because quite often you will not be delivering good operational results in the very beginning because you will be reinvesting all the money into the business to scale faster. So that's in short. Now let's discuss a little bit in the next lecture the things that can actually prevent you from scaling and what you should look at when you are discussing how much you can scale the business.